provide information and feedback when it goes off, when it goes awry.
Certainly areas.
Only if we get called in the office.
Productivity.
Productivity, okay,
For sure.
okay.
Overtime.
Overtime?
Productivity,
Yeah.
yeah, all those in the
So who
productivity.
measures what?
Well, I was getting ready to say one thing that Jerry and I was talking about just now. The biggest thing for us, been looking at that is, right now, in order to get your positions approved, you have to have that,
You gotta be in range.
green.
Yes, you
So if you haven't managed your budget for that month
Yeah,
properly, then you'll probably have to
Yeah.
get positions approved. So that's one of the ways that managers are looking at it.
I give a lot of input into that, because my boss sits on the LO committee now formally. And so I'm asked all the time, what's going on TK's unit with productivity? Well, boss?
Well, it's like my unit is capped for, the first few months of the
Yep.
fiscal year.
Yep.
My budget was never, changed.
Yep.
It was a cap, so like all my, and I was using, on top of a cap, I had low census, so I was using massive amounts of PTO. I will not hit productivity this year. There's no way possible for me to hit my productivity.
Yep.
It's just no way
And
possible.
TK had the same
problem.
issue.
I'm like
I reached out to
82%,
Steve.
there's no way for me to hit it. There's-
Well, we had 10 beds closed
Yeah, she
for
was giving
almost the
up
whole
beds
year.
And it wasn't adjusted
You
for
were giving
that
up beds
cap.
for vascular access at one point.
We gave up 3 beds for vascular access, but we also had 10 beds closed because 9 West was being built.
So how do you
at the
account?
time while y'all were being built, they had
How do
already
you-
more in
closed
position.
How
down.
do you account for that in your control processes and your variance analysis so that you can explain it?
Exactly.
Because if you're not hitting productivity, as an example, in this control process and you need positions, do you have the statistical information and the validated information to be able to explain why? Part of why we have the acuity system, and I'm so staunch about how we bring it online, because it's going to be helpful to us. In that, for instance, in Geraldine's world, with regard to CCRT or CRTs and LVADs and those kind of things, we can explain statistically the impact of having those on the units. Same way in the orthopedics issues with time of care to get people up and moving and those kind of things.
It's kind of funny with the acuity system, I was looking at it the other day, and we don't do CRT, not yet.
Sorry, I was thinking about
We're not trying to push it
another.
there,
Well,
but
I'm trying
I
to push
think
it there
it's
for you.
between the LVADs and the insulin drips and all of that, but with our current grid, we can have 7 nurses working
Yep.
each shift. So I looked at the acuity system the other day, and it said that we could have 10 nurses for that shift.
Well, here's the trick.
Wow.
Here's the trick. Don't pay attention to that yet.
I
The
did,
staff still pay attention.
but I like that.
I know. Staff
But
pay
when I
attention
look
to it.
at the PST ratio, we can have 3 or 4
Yeah.
on the unit, but it said we could only have 2.
So we're
So
still,
that's
and
the
we're still
documentation.
validating what's going on back there. So my message in that is, because people have asked me that before as a side note, well, this says I'm 2 over, or I'm 2 under, or whatever. Take it with a grain of salt until I
Right.
validated that the documentation is flowing against the instruments
Right.
correctly. So we're still working through that. And I'm gonna be seeing each one of you probably individually
Yeah.
as we work through that, so, and to talk further about that. So, but it varies as to timing in a budget. What have we adjusted in our budgets right now? We did annual budgets, now we're doing quarterly.
Right.
So I'm hearing all kinds of, and I haven't seen them, I'm hearing all kinds of rumors about new budget periods. Fourth quarter, and I haven't seen them. So I don't know if you have.
No, we
I
haven't heard
did.
that. We haven't heard that.
To make a lot of changes.
You had to make some changes?
Yes, my staffing group, we got 3.7 hours per patient day.
So there you go, so we hear a change now
Yeah.
in that area. So my
Just
point in
before
that
the
is,
patients are-
Thank
you. Yeah, so go green may
but
not
my
happen.
point in that is that you as a manager, when you're asked to do that, what we're gonna talk about today in terms of being able to analyze your demand quickly, is, does that make sense? Again, go back to that realistic, be useful, does a 3.7 hour per patient day cut make sense in her area given what she's seeing in the demand patterns?
I was told we had to do it to be at the 25th percentile.
See, that, I don't know yet, that's what I'm trying to figure
Yeah,
out.
and that was the reason that it was
But
done.
we're trying to figure out what that balance is, because again, we talked, Sarah, we talked strategy. We're gonna talk a lot about numbers, but I think kind of my caveat, and everybody else kind of knows my background, is I talk about these things. I've been in healthcare 27 years, and I've been on the clinical side of the house for a long time. critical care, flight paramedic, and ground paramedic. So I understand the care pathway processes. And my point in that is that when we do these things, and what I'm teaching you is in balance financially with what it means from a safety perspective, from an employee perspective, from a patient outcomes perspective, we strategically have to balance all of these things. So we get back into what we're talking about around realism. We have to set an appropriate plan, and then we have to control it and stick to it in that regard, unless there's a very valid reason, because we've had an acuity shift we didn't understand before, or something did shift, or we've had a census shift that we didn't anticipate in the process. So types of budgets, all of these are there. The ones that we deal with are the operating budgets. I talked a little bit about the long-range budget. There are program budgets. For instance, in the heart world, from a STEMI program management standpoint, there is a program budget. There is a stroke program budget. There is a trauma program budget that is cross-sectional across a whole bunch of departments that says for the trauma services program, this is how much it costs to run trauma services and how much revenue we anticipate bringing in. Now that revenue gets trickled out to STICU or to an SSU for trauma or 7 East or wherever it may end up. There are capital budgets, and most importantly, there is a cash budget, as we talked about last time. We have to know timing of cash flows to be able to pay the bills, make that payroll this coming Friday, and keep the lights on. So in operating budgets, what we deal with is plan to plan, plan from day to day, covers a period of year, but we're doing it in quarters now. Shows both. When you look at your operating budget, and the one thing I do want you guys to do, not for next week, but for the following week, I'd like for you to print out your reports from web operating budget and bring it with you. And we're going to talk about, in the end, as we build the grids and we control them, ultimately we're responsible as managers of our budgets for two things. What is that? We obviously know productivity, but can you be productive and be grossly out of line on your dollars budget? Yes. The end goal, I know we talk so much about productivity and I'm not a fan. I really think they need to change the entire ClickView system and put dollars up there. I see the labor side of it, but we really don't, from a productive standpoint, we don't have dollars, because that's the ultimate end goal, quite frankly, for sustainability of the organization. So it covers both. We have an expected profit margin. If we were for profit, some could be dividends, but we're not. So we have our profit is our contribution back to ourselves, right? 1.25%. Which now, to make that up for this year, what was the target Mr. Dwayne set in LI that we got to hit between now and the end of the year? 19.3 or 19.5 million in profits to make up the loss and then hit the operating margin. Is that doable?
Yeah. I'll be optimistic.
Actually, I think it is doable. It takes a lot of hard work and effort on everybody's part, but I think it is doable. We'll see what happens. So program budget we talked about could be a new or current program. Have you guys done baby friendly?
We're on the journey.
You're on the journey for baby friendly?
Yeah.
There are costs associated with a baby friendly program in terms of implementation from a programmatic standpoint that you have to take into account. May take you a long time to plan that, particularly if we're starting a completely new service line. So let's say from a program standpoint, what don't we do at Palmetto right now? We don't do transplant. So if we were to, somebody were to say strategically in the plan, it makes sense for us to do transplant. That's kind of an out-of-the-box example, but it's something we don't have. It's one of the few things we don't have. It's going to take us a long time to really kind of set up a program budget and understand what it's going to take to get into transplant. So generally a multi-year budget. And you have to look at both the labor and the equipment for multiple departments, because for a transplant program, you've got the surgical process and then you've got the inpatient care process post-surgery, right? That both are going to be impacted. Cash budget is just what it is. It's the plan and timing of when you put it in, take it in, and put it out. It's generally 1 year on a monthly basis. So every month they anticipate how much cash is going to come in, how much cash is going to go out, because there are secular issues, just like we have secular census issues in areas. Flu got very busy. Traumas, we're in the season of trauma now as an example. There's a timing of when that cash comes in and goes out. So let me ask you this question. Can we be profitable? Let's say in theory that we were showing a $10 million profit. And can we still have a cash crisis?
Yes.
Yes.
How?
It depends when the cash comes in. So you could, it's the same as when we get paid, and you get paid every 2 weeks, and you're hoping you have cash at the end, you know the money's coming, but payday's not until next Friday, so we're a little short on cash.
So in our world, where would you see that cash,
Right, right.
where would you see that cash crisis come into play in our world in a hospital, from a timing standpoint?
Paying for, supplies.
Okay, so any expense, okay, so we have to pay the expenses typically, and we do a net, we like to do a net 45, which means you gotta pay it within 45 days of the day you buy it or what you do. How long does it take to get revenue in the door for patients?
45 years.
I was gonna say 90 days, but
It depends on the payer. Some pay really quick, some pay really slow.
Yeah.
I've seen it take as long as 6 months, depending on the payer. But the average, and Toomey's probably the best in the system right now, and the average for Toomey used to be, I think, what they say, 90 days in LI, and they've got that down. Yeah, so they're almost 45, so if we're paying expenses in two to 3 weeks, or a little over a month, we're getting that revenue in, so they've got less of a cash crunch than we do. I can tell you our AR is better over here, but it's not as good as Toomey's. So I showed you the other day on the financials, I showed them, we had how many days of operating cash? 2 on that one financial. On the final financial, it was 28 million. That's only 4 days of operating cash, if everything were to shut off. And by that I mean, Sarah, what I explained to them, the system, it costs us $7 million a day to run the system. By the time we close the doors today and go home, it's going to cost us $7 million to run the organization. So when you're looking at profitability, you can be profitable because of the delay in receipts against what's going out. You can have a cash crunch and still show a technical net profit on the books because of timing issues. That's why cash budgets are so important. That's why cash flow statement is so important to understand the timing of when it's going in and coming out. So a capital budget. Long-term investments, defined as a capital budget, is anything with a year lifespan or greater. In our world, there is a monetary value, but the Federal Accounting Standards Boards allow you to have a little leeway of what you set your threshold at. Ours is $1,000 for an individual piece of equipment. That's longer than a lifespan of a year. Not a medication that costs $6,000 a year, because it's not going to last longer than a year. You'll give it 5 to 10 minutes. But your beds, your monitors, even your blood pressure machines are technically capital equipment. Is there a couple $1,000, $3,000 per unit to buy, something like that? Any of that stuff is beyond a year lifespan and expected to be used up over the expected lifespan. So that's one of the big accounting issues there, is that if you say that it's got a lifespan of 7 years, you can expect that it should last 7 years and be used up and consumed over 7 years. Okay? Whatever that piece of equipment is. A monitor typically is designed to last 5 to 7 years. Unless rapid changes in technology say it needs to be changed out or anything like that. Bed, I don't know how long you guys keep beds for. Too long?
No, go down to the bed.
Yep. MRI machine? Everybody know? Typically five years on an MRI, 5 to 7 years on an MRI before you start using it up, and or they come out with new technology that improves cycle time on the MRI that can improve revenue flow. So let's talk about how they're evaluated. I'm going to show you a couple of examples here in just a minute because I want you to understand financially how capital pieces of equipment are evaluated. They're really evaluated on a couple of different ways. On return on investment, I spend $1 million, how quickly am I going to make up that $1 million in revenue, and how much more revenue beyond $1 million am I going to make? Right? How fast is that going to happen, and where do the two lines cross in terms of my depreciation expense versus revenue generated from that? Okay? One of the big problems with return on investment, and generally the project with the highest ROI is generally taken. I.e., If return on investment's $1 million for this project, and only 500,000 for this project, don't take the one with $1 million. Now, the problem with that is the timing of the cash flows. Why is that? Why do you think it's a timing issue? Doesn't take it into account. If timing is important to you, and we need a piece of equipment to generate some revenue right now, does it make sense to buy the $1 million piece of equipment if it's going to take a year for it to start generating revenue versus 500,000? Maybe not. So there is a little bit of a flaw in a pure ROI process because of timing. You have to make sure you understand how quickly you're going to see a return on that investment. Because it may be that you have an exponentiated curve, and when I say exponentiated curve, this is a linear curve, an exponentiated curve gets steeper as you go along, okay? So it starts out kind of slow, and then at some point it really takes off, okay? And from a revenue standpoint, sometimes you see this in capital investment where you have very little revenue the first couple of years, and then it takes off, okay? So it doesn't take into account timing flows. Payback method, it just simply asks how long is it going to take to repay the initial expense based on what's coming in on the capital expense. One of the problems with this is it ignores what happens over the payback period. So as an example, if you have two comparable pieces of equipment and their payback periods are 2 years each, they're equal, right, under this method, right? What happens if that useful life of that piece of equipment is 5 years for equipment A and 10 years for equipment B? And you're going to continue to generate revenue throughout that lifespan. Which one would you then take? Piece of equipment B, right? One of the big problems with this method is it doesn't look at anything beyond when you get your money back on that piece of equipment. So it's a fairly flawed process, but it is one method that you can see used. This is typically what is used the most, is a discounted cash flow method, okay? This considers the timing of flow in terms of the time value of money. What do I mean by the time value of money? Think about it from an interest standpoint. You put $1,000 in the bank at 10% interest annually for the next 10 years on simple interest. How much money will you have? You'll have $100 per year for the next 10 years. That's the discounted process. Think of it in reverse, okay? And we'll talk about this more. Basically, all I'm doing is taking the interest, whereas I say, out here 10 years from now, I'll have $2,000 functionally in simple interest. What you do is reverse it and say, how much do I have to invest now to get to $1,000 in that 10 years? It's $100, fundamentally. Okay, does that make sense? So you're just reversing simple interest process and discounted cash flow is all you're doing. And I'll show you that here in just a minute in the numbers. So it takes into account future receipts, and we discount those future receipts back to present day money based on that interest rate. So if I take $100 and I'm going to discount it 1 year at 10%, 10% of 100 is 10. 100 minus 10 is 90. So that money 1 year from now at 100 is worth, at 10% is worth $90 today. That's discounted cash flow process. Okay? So the most common prep methods are present cost, net present value, return on investment. And each are going to reveal a different answer in which way to go. And it's important you know, if you're talking with somebody, if they're using a methodology, what their methodology is, because you will get different answers for the same piece of equipment, two pieces of equipment based on which methodology you use. So here we go. So we have alternative one, and we're going to pretend this is an MRI machine. MRI machines are apparently very cheap in this world, okay, $25,000. I'm not going into the MRI business because I'm not going to make a whole lot of money, but we're going to pretend it's an MRI machine. So in alternative one, we lay out $10,000 initially, that's our down payment, and we're going to pay for it over the next 5 years because we expect it to have a useful life of 5 years, okay? So in alternative one, we're going to pay out $10,000 and then $3,000 per year for the next 5 years to a total cost of $25,000. And over here, we're going to pay out $7,500. We're going to put out less money, Because remember, we're in a cash crunch. How much money did I say we had in the bank? 2 days worth of cash, right? I ain't got a lot of cash to throw around, okay? So we may have to look at alternative two. But does alternative two make sense? Because in the end, I'm gonna pay $500 more for it, right? Because I'm laying out $7,500 and I'm paying $3,600 for that piece of equipment and going to $25,500. Which makes more sense to you? One, because I put out less money, but I don't have the 10,000, I don't have the extra money to put out. But I paid less money overall.
Go to the foundation.
Huh?
Have a fundraiser.
A fundraiser, we have a bake sale.
Yeah.
You know, Women's Services over here sells the cookies and the cupcakes, and I really hate them because I never can pass by and not get any stuff. But I love it, so. All right, let's see. All right, so this is the present cost approach, okay? What happens in the present cost approach is we're only looking at what from a time value standpoint, what the present value cost of purchasing that piece of equipment over the next 5 years is based on the interest rate, okay? So we're gonna discount portions of this backwards to today's value. We do not discount on either side the down payment because we paid it out today, right? But we need to know how much $3,000 in 5 years is worth today, $3,000 in 4 years is worth today, $3,000 in 3 years, and so forth. Does that make sense? Everybody follow me? Okay? So, and I've set this at, I think I set this at 5% discount flow, okay? So what you do is you take the discounted amounts of $15,000 back to today's money at 5%, and in that percentage rate, today's money, $15,000 would be worth $11,372 today. So what that's really saying is, at 5%, if I take $11,372 today to reverse it into our world, and I put that into my savings account at 5%, in 5 years, I would have $15,000. Okay? Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. So what you do is you take the down payment, the present value of these cash flows, you add them up on both sides, and you see which one over the next 5 years costs the least amount of money in today's dollars, discount. And that is actually option B, even though we spent more money. Why is that? Why did that happen?
Because you're paying more.
Think about it.
Is it because you initially invested the 2,500 instead of outlining it up front? Is that kind of?
Yeah, it's a timing issue in terms of cash flow timing. Because you put less money out, even though you spent more overall, right? You put less money out, so you were able to defer some of the cost by virtue of making larger payments later and holding on to your money. Here's the theory of that. And remember I told you about why my wife does not let me pay the bills? Because from an accountant standpoint, money in my pocket is money I'm earning interest on. What if I can take that money and earn interest on it that's more than 5% and then make those larger payments? So that this $10,000 right here is $7,500.